观众朋友，大家好，欢迎收看今天的辛枫视线。那么这两天大家比较关注的一个国际新闻，就是美国财长耶伦在周四最新发表的对华讲话。耶伦再次强调了拜登政府宁愿付出一点经济成本，也要全力保护美国的国家安全利益，免受中国的威胁。这个说法其实也是老生常谈了。耶伦在周四的原话是说，国家安全在我们与中国的关系中至关重要，我们不会在这些问题上妥协，即使这会迫使我们与经济利益进行权衡。那彼得森国际经济研究所所长就表示这段话就是演讲中最重要的一段话，虽然没有什么新的点，但是就是真正表达了拜登政府现在的立场。除此之外呢，耶伦提到的另外两个美国与中国打交道的主要要点，一个是要寻求健康和公平的竞争关系，那就还是暗示中国的做法不够公平。然后呢，还有一个是敦促中国参与解决发展中国家的气候变化和债务减免等问题。同时呢，耶伦还重申，他还是计划在适当的时候要访问中国。这样的说法其实已经进行了几个月，但是一直因为各种原因被耽搁。前不久所谓的间谍气球也导致了中美紧张局势升级。耶伦说，希望与新的中国政府班子就经济问题进行重要和实质性的对话。美国的中国观察人士就认为，耶伦最终去不去得成中国，球在北京脚下，中国将决定此行是否能够成行。那么中国这边是怎么回应的呢？中国外交部发言人汪文斌在今天4月21号的新闻发布会上就说，中国始终坚持合作共赢的新型大国关系，同一些国家搞小圈子、搞阵营对抗不同。那在今年2月，拜登发表国情咨文的时候说，美国寻求与中国竞争而不是冲突。中国外交部也是回应说，中美关系不是你输我赢、你兴我衰的零和博弈，要各自发展，共同繁荣。回顾这几年呢，但凡是回应美国关于中美竞争关系的话题，中方的主要基调永远就是中美不是零和博弈的竞争对手。那么究竟什么是零和博弈呢？博弈游戏到底要怎么玩呢？最佳策略究竟是什么呢？今天我们就来讨论一下，博弈游戏吃亏上当的总是老好人吗？由于对政治、经济、军事策略起到非常重要的作用，博弈论已经成为了一个专门的研究领域，它位于数学和心理学的交叉地带。它是专门研究有哪些理由和策略会驱使人们相互合作，而不是相互竞争的一门科学。如果我们把博弈看成一个游戏的话，那么它的目标就不像是打牌那样，一个人赢了，其他人就输了。在那种游戏中，试图与对手达成一致来实现合作是没有任何意义的。但是在博弈游戏中，两人合作才能够赢。有一个最简单的、最典型的博弈游戏叫做分享还是盗走。我们先一起来玩一下，体会一下博弈的感觉。它是怎么玩的呢？假设你正在和一个陌生人坐在同一张桌子边上，我在桌子上放了1万元，让你们2个人分享，同时给你们一人一张纸，让你们分别悄悄地写下你要选择分享还是要盗走，然后打开你们的纸。如果你们2人都写了分享，那么这些钱就会平均的一分为2，你们2个人各得5000元。如果你们一个人写了分享，另外一个人写了盗走，那么写了盗走的人就会拿走全部的钱，而写分享的人则1分也拿不到。如果你们2个人都写了盗走，那么你们都不能够分到这笔钱，但是我会给你们每个人100块钱的安慰奖。就这么简单，你会怎么做呢？那么我们乍一看，最佳的解决方案当然是和另外那个陌生人一起选择平分这笔钱，各自得5000块钱。但是你怎么能够确定对方不会写下盗走而独吞这笔钱呢？而你自己也可能很想要独吞这笔钱。那么从你自己利益的最大化角度来考虑，如果对方选择了分享，那你就应该选择盗走，这样你就能够独吞全部的1万元。如果对方选择了盗走，那么你最好也选择盗走，这样至少还能够拿到100块钱的安慰奖。因此，不管对方选择什么，对你来说，最好的选择永远都是写盗走，对不对？当然了，在你对面的陌生人肯定也是这么想的，对他来说，选择盗走也总是最佳策略。所以说，最终结局就是你们2个人都会选择盗走。 那么现在回过头来看，虽然在刚开始的时候我们说到过，明明选择平分这笔钱是最佳方案，各得5000元，但是人们却总是会选择倒走。在这个分享还是倒走的游戏中，结果与2个玩家的选择息息相关，它不一定会出现一方输另一方就赢的情况，它也会出现都输或者都赢。这种类型的游戏就被称为非零和博弈。这是不是和中美关系有点像呢？中国就说我们要共赢，不要零和博弈，但是谁都不相信对方真的会在小纸条上写下共享。那么在20世纪50年代，人们通过著名的囚徒困境的例子，首次就将这一点理论化了。囚徒困境是一个著名的场景，这个游戏非常简单，它模拟了这样一个场景，有2位囚徒，我们暂时给他们取名叫做邦尼和克莱德，就是美国著名的这个雌雄大盗的名字。假设他们俩都被抓住了，分别被警方询问，2个人都有平分罪责或者是给自己减刑的机会，而事实上警方并没有任何证据来指控2人，于是警方想了一个方法，将2人分开问话。我们来看一下这张囚徒困境的图。如果说2个人都选择保持沉默，不出卖对方，他们将会仅仅因为非法持有枪支罪而入狱1年。如果一方指认了对方，也就是出卖对方，而另一方并没有出卖这一方，那么指认的一方将会被完全的释放，被指认的那一方将会被判处10年的监禁。而如果2个人彼此相互指认都出卖了对方，那么他们则将分别面临5年的监禁。那就像前面那个游戏一样，2人协同合作，看上去似乎是最有力的解决方案，各判1年就行了。但是罪犯们总是更自然地倾向于要出卖他们的搭档。在过去的几十年中，数学家们和心理学家们对非零和博弈做了大量的研究，他们想要更好地理解到底是什么因素驱使人们要相互合作，或者驱使人们做出更加自私的选择。这门学科就叫做博弈论。看到这里，你也许会说，刚才我们提到的场景都太刻意了，太捏造了，在现实生活中真的会有这样的情景吗？事实上，想一想，这种场景还是很多的。比如说读书或者工作的时候，2个人需要合作完成一个报告，你可以独挑大梁，让别人去偷懒，你们也可以合作，人人都想偷懒，但是如果2个人都偷懒，这个报告就完不成了。还有更常见的，比如说多重博弈。在这周4耶伦的讲话中就提到要和中国合作的这个环保议题，全球减排问题。在全球层面，每个国家都说我们要保护地球，再拖是真的来不及了。然而在个体层面上，每个国家都可能希望别的国家在这件事情上多承担一点，因为减少碳排放就意味着要关掉更多的工厂，工厂产能就会下降。如果不关闭，把它们改造成清洁能源，那么就需要很大一笔资金。拜登政府现在就在大力推动清洁能源，推动太阳能的发展，但是现实问题是太阳能贵啊，而且全球的太阳能面板的主要生产地是中国新疆，拜登政府又要抵制新疆便宜的太阳能面板就不能进来，美国买家只能买贵的产品，真的是叫苦连天。所以在现实中，谁都希望别的国家可以为环保多承担一点。博弈问题其实就是大国之间在经济战争或者军事战争中经常要面临的问题。再比如说，2个国家正在冷战当中，他们各自有选择，可以把这笔钱花在制造核武器上，也可以把钱花在提高全民教育和医疗上。如果2个国家只有其中一个研制出了核武器，那么它就会摧毁另外一方。如果2者都研制出了核武器，那么冷战继续。但是如果2者都选择投入全民教育和医疗，那就是普天同庆，皆大欢喜的结局。在这里我们也可以看到，协同合作，也就是都去发展教育和医疗是最理想的选择。但是选择不合作，跟前面一样的原因，又成为了不约而同的选择。我们已经看到，在简单的博弈中，每个博弈者都倾向于选择更加自私的选项，这是人之常情。但是如果我现在告诉你，你将会和同一个人连续玩50次分享或者盗走的游戏呢？想一想你会怎么做呢？你是不是就会改变你之前的策略呢？重复的连续背叛，肯定渐渐双方都会感觉到，哎呀，这样下去不行啊。于是在20世纪80年代，数学家阿克塞尔罗就试图确定 在这种重复的博弈当中，是否存在一个最佳策略？于是他组织了一个大型的赛事，邀请了60个人真的来玩这场游戏。这60个人当中还包括一些数学家、物理学家、心理学家等等。最后呢，让他们提交他们所使用的策略，看看哪种策略可以赢得最多分。他发现有些人使用的策略非常简单，比如说，除非对方连续背叛我2次，否则我就一直选择跟他合作。而有些人的策略就非常复杂，毕竟他请到了一些专业的数学家和物理学家来玩，那些人的策略就会涉及到概率问题等等。那最后呢，出乎所有人的意料，阿克塞尔罗竞赛最后的大赢家是一个极其简单的策略，叫做投桃报李策略，就是我们用蓝色显示的这个策略的原则就是永远选择你的对手上一轮的选择，也就是说，如果对方刚刚背叛了你，那你这一轮也去背叛他如果是他上一轮选择了合作，那么你这一轮也选择合作，就这么简单。你如果仔细看一看右边的结局统计，投桃报李策略其实对上其他任何一种策略，它都没有赢过，胜利场数是0，但是它的平局非常多，而且它每局获得的分数非常高。相反，我们来看投桃报李策略的上一行，老混蛋策略。老混蛋策略，你看它的结局，它没有输过任何一场比赛，但是每局赢得的分数都不高，最终它的总分就没有投桃报李高。这完美说明了单纯赢得每一场比赛和试图获得更高分之间的区别。如果我们是玩打牌的话，那么这2点的目标是一致的，你赢的比赛越多，赚的钱就越多。但是在非零和博弈中，情况就不是这样。在这里，获得最多分数的策略却是那个不会赢得任何比赛的策略。反之，老混蛋策略赢得了最多的比赛，然而却是获利最少的。那么说到这里，会不会给你带来一些启示呢？另外，这场博弈游戏还有第2个非常有意思的教训，那就是它教我们不要记仇。投桃报李的策略当中博弈者只需要基于对手上一次的选择来行动，你不用管他在之前几轮是怎么对你的，只要对方上一轮背叛了你，那你也给他好看。但是如果对方表现出了一点合作的倾向，那你也选择合作，哪怕他之前已经骗了你100次。总而言之，咱们绝对不要记仇，这样你就能够赚到最多的钱。我们也可以把这个策略称之为有仇就报仇，但是要无条件的宽恕别人。而老混蛋策略呢，则给我们一个启示，在工作当中，将你的同事一个一个的干掉，未必会是攀上顶峰的最佳方案。那么在现实生活中，你有没有准备好要去采用投桃报李策略呢？以上就是今天的辛枫视线，感谢您的收看。如果有什么意见和建议，也欢迎您给我们留言评论。在节目的最后呢，我们再放上本周4美国财长耶伦的最新对华政策演讲全文，感兴趣的朋友可以继续观看。我们下期节目再见。
Thank you so much, and good morning, everyone. Dean Steinberg, thank you for your kind introduction, and thank you for your service to our country. I'm grateful for your contributions, not only during your time in government, but here at SAIS. And I'm particularly glad to be at this institution. SAIS has one of the oldest and most extensive China studies programs in the country. In 1979, the United States established full diplomatic relations with the People's Republic of China, and just 2 years after, your university leaders had their own talks with their Chinese counterparts. The goal was to see whether Johns Hopkins and Nanjing University could partner together to educate future leaders. The result? The establishment of the Hopkins-Nanjing Center in 1986, one of the first Western academic programs in modern China. This collaboration has been tested by the realities and complexities of our bilateral relationship, but I believe the students on this campus have served as a reminder of the respect that the American and Chinese people have for each other. And they demonstrate that people around the world can learn from one another if we communicate openly and honestly even and especially when we disagree. Since I began my career, the relationship between the United States and China has undergone a significant evolution. In the 1970s, our relationship was defined by rapprochement and gradual normalization. I watched President Nixon make his famous journey to China in 1972, and I heard our two countries begin to speak to each other again after decades of silence. In the years that followed, I saw China choose to implement market reforms and open itself to the global economy, driving an impressive rise into the second largest economy in the world. Its development was supported by assistance from the World Bank and other international economic institutions, and the US Congress and successive administrations played a major role in supporting China's integration into global markets. But in recent years, I've also seen China's decision to pivot away from market reforms toward a more state-driven approach that has undercut its neighbors and countries across the world. This has come as China is striking a more confrontational posture toward the United States and our allies and partners, not only in the Indo-Pacific, but also in Europe and other regions. Today, we're at a critical time. The world is confronting the largest land war in Europe since World War II, just as it recovers from a once-in-a-century pandemic. Debt challenges are mounting for low and middle-income countries. Some nations, including our own, have faced pressure on their economic and financial systems. And a UN report released last month indicates that the Earth is likely to cross a critical global warming threshold within the next decade if no drastic action is taken. Progress on these issues requires constructive engagement between the world's two largest economies, yet our relationship is clearly at a tense moment. So today, I'd like to discuss our economic relationship with China. My goal is to be clear and honest, to cut through the noise and speak to this essential relationship based on sober realities. The United States proceeds with confidence in its long-term economic strength. We remain the largest and most dynamic economy in the world. We also remain firm in our conviction to defend our values and national security. Within that context, we seek a constructive and fair economic relationship with China. Both countries need to be able to frankly discuss difficult issues, and we should work together when possible for the benefit of our countries and the world. Our economic approach to China has three principal objectives. First, we will secure our national security interests and those of our allies and partners, and we will protect human rights. We will clearly communicate to the PRC our concerns about its behavior, and we will not hesitate to defend our vital interests. Even as our targeted actions may have economic impacts, they are motivated solely by our concerns about our security and values. Our goal is not to use these tools to gain competitive economic advantage. Second, we seek a healthy economic relationship with China, one that fosters growth and innovation in both countries. A growing China that plays by international rules is good for the United States and the world. Both countries can benefit from healthy competition in the economic sphere. But healthy economic competition, where both sides benefit, is only sustainable if this competition is fair. We will continue to partner with our allies to respond to China's unfair economic practices, and we will continue to make critical investments at home while engaging with the world to advance our vision for an open, fair, and rules-based global economic order. Third, we seek cooperation on the urgent global challenges of our day. Since last year's meeting between Presidents Biden and Xi, both countries have agreed to enhance communication around the macroeconomy and cooperation on issues like climate and debt distress. But more needs to be done. We call on China to follow through on its promise to work with us on these issues, not as a favor to us, but out of our joint duty and obligation to the world. Tackling these issues together will also advance the national interests of both of our countries. Let me begin by discussing the state of our economies. In recent years, many have seen conflict between the United States and China as increasingly inevitable. This was driven by fears shared by some Americans that the United States was in decline and that China would imminently leapfrog us as the world's top economic power, leading to a clash between nations. It's important to know this. Pronouncements of U.S. decline have been around for decades, but they have always been proven wrong. The United States has repeatedly demonstrated its ability to adapt and reinvent to face new challenges, and this time will be no different, and the economic statistics show why. Since the end of the Cold War, the American economy has grown faster than most other advanced economies. And over the past 2 years, we have mounted the strongest post-pandemic recovery among major advanced economies. Our unemployment rate is near historic lows. Real GDP per capita has reached an all-time high. And we've experienced the strongest 2-year growth in new businesses on record. This recovery is made possible by the strength of our economic fundamentals. Of course, this does not mean that our work is finished. Our top economic priority is to rein in inflation while protecting the economic gains of our recovery. A few weeks ago, the United States took decisive action to strengthen public confidence in the banking system after the failures of 2 regional institutions. The U.S. banking system remains sound, and we will take any necessary steps to ensure the United States continues to have the strongest and safest financial system in the world. Over the past few decades, China has experienced an impressive economic rise. Between 1980 and 2010, China's economy grew by an average of 10% per year, and this led to a truly remarkable feat, namely the rise of hundreds of millions of people out of poverty. China's rapid catch-up growth was fueled by its opening up to global trade and pursuit of market reforms. But like many countries, China today faces its share of near-term headwinds. This includes vulnerabilities in its property sector, high youth unemployment, and weak household consumption. In the longer term, China faces structural challenges. Its population is aging, and its workforce is already declining. And it's experienced a sharp reduction in productivity growth amid its turn toward economic nationalism and policies that substantially increase the government's intervention in the economy. None of these recent developments detract from China's progress or the hard work and talent of the Chinese people. But China's long-run growth rate seems likely to decline. Of course, an economy's size is not the sole determinant of its strength. America is the largest economy in the world, but it also remains an unparalleled leader on a broad set of economic metrics, from wealth to technological innovation. U.S. GDP per capita is among the highest in the world and over 5 times as large as China's. More than resources or geography, our country's success can be attributed to our people, values, and institutions. American democracy, well, not perfect, protects the free exchange of ideas and rule of law that is at the bedrock of sustainable growth. Our educational and scientific institutions lead the world. Our innovative culture is enriched by new immigrants, including those from China, enabling us to continue to generate world-class, cutting-edge products and industries. Importantly, our economic power is amplified because we don't stand alone. America values our close friends and partners in every region of the world, including the Indo-Pacific. In the 21st century, no country in isolation can create a strong and sustainable economy for its people. That's why, under President Biden's leadership, we've sought to rebuild and reinvest in our relationships with other countries. All this is to say, China's economic growth need not be incompatible with U.S. economic leadership. The United States remains the most dynamic and prosperous economy in the world, and we have no reason to fear healthy economic competition with any country. There are many challenges before us, but the President and I believe that China and the United States can manage our economic relationship responsibly. We can work toward a future in which both countries share in and drive global economic progress. Whether we can reach this vision depends in large part on what both countries do in the next few years. So let me speak to our first objective, securing our national security and protecting human rights. These are areas where we will not compromise. As in all of our foreign relations, national security is of paramount importance in our relationship with China. For example, we've made clear that safeguarding certain technologies from the PRC's military and security apparatus is of vital national interest. We have a broad suite of tools to achieve this aim. When necessary, we will take narrowly targeted actions. The U.S. government's actions can come in the form of export controls. They can include additions to an entity list that restricts access by those that provide support to the People's Liberation Army. The Treasury Department has sanctioned authorities to address threats related to cybersecurity and China's military-civil fusion. We also carefully review foreign investments in the United States for national security risks and take necessary actions to address any such risks. And we're considering a program to restrict certain U.S. outbound investments in specific sensitive technologies with significant national security implications. As we take these actions, let me be clear. These national security actions are not designed for us to gain a competitive economic advantage or to stifle China's economic and technological modernization. Even though these policies may have economic impacts, they are driven by straightforward national security considerations, and we will not compromise on these concerns even when they force trade-offs with our economic interests. There are key principles that guide our national security actions in the economic sphere. First, these actions will be narrowly scoped and targeted to clear objectives. They will be calibrated to mitigate spillovers into other areas. Second, it's vital that these tools are easily understood and enforceable, and they must be readily adaptable when circumstances change. Third, when possible, we will engage and coordinate with our allies and partners in the design and execution of our policies. In addition, communication is essential to mitigating the risk of misunderstanding and unintended escalation. When we take national security actions, we will continue to outline our policy reasoning to other countries, and we will listen and address concerns about unintended consequences. Among our most pressing national security concerns is Russia's illegal and unprovoked war against Ukraine. In my visit to Kyiv, I saw firsthand the brutality of Russia's invasion. The Kremlin has bombed hospitals, destroyed cultural sites, attacked energy grids to cause widespread pain and suffering among civilians. Ending Russia's war is a moral imperative, and it will save many innocent lives. As I've said, it's also the single best thing we can do for the global economy. To help end Russia's war, we have mounted the swiftest, most unified, and most ambitious multilateral sanctions regime in modern history. Our broad coalition of partners has also provided assistance to Ukraine so it can defend itself. China's no-limits partnership and support for Russia is a worrisome indication that it is not serious about ending the war. It is essential that China and other countries do not provide Russia with material support or assistance with sanctions evasion. We will continue to make the position of the United States extremely clear to Beijing and companies in its jurisdiction. The consequences of any violations would be severe. Like national security, we will not compromise on the protection of human rights. This principle is foundational to how we engage with the world. With our own eyes, the world has seen the PRC government escalate its repression at home. It has deployed technology to surveil and control the Chinese people, technology that it is now exporting to dozens of countries. Human rights abuses violate the world's moral conscience. They also violate the foundational principles of the United Nations, which virtually every country, including China, has signed on to. The United States will continue to use our tools to disrupt and deter human rights abuses wherever they occur around the globe. In public and in private with Beijing, the United States has raised serious concerns about the PRC government's abuses in Xinjiang, as well as in Hong Kong, Tibet, and other parts of China. And we have and will continue to take action. We've imposed sanctions on the PRC's regional officials and companies for a range of human rights abuses, from torture to arbitrary detention. And we're restricting imports of goods produced with forced labor in Xinjiang. Across these actions, we're working in concert with our allies, knowing that we're more effective when we all go at it together. As we protect our security's interests and human rights values, we will also pursue our second objective, healthy economic engagement that benefits both countries. Let's start with the obvious. The US and China are the two largest economies in the world, and we are deeply integrated with one another. Overall trade between our countries reached over $700 billion in 2021. We trade more with China than with any countries other than Canada and Mexico. American firms have extensive operations in China. Hundreds of Chinese firms are listed on our stock exchanges, which are part of the deepest and most liquid capital markets in the world. According to the Nature Index, the United States and China are each other's most significant scientific collaborators, and China remains among the top sources for international students in the United States. As I've said, the United States will assert ourselves when our vital interests are at stake, but we do not seek to decouple our economy from China's. A full separation of our economies would be disastrous for both countries. It would be destabilizing for the rest of the world. Rather, we know that the health of the Chinese and US economies is closely linked. A growing China that plays by the rules can be beneficial for the United States. For instance, it can mean rising demand for U.S. products and services and more dynamic U.S. industries. In April 2021, I delivered my first major international economic policy speech as Treasury Secretary, and I said that credibility abroad begins with credibility at home. At a basic level, America's ability to compete in the 21st century turns on the choices that Washington makes, not those that Beijing makes. Our economic strategy is centered around investing in ourselves, not suppressing or containing any other economy. In the 2 years since my speech, the United States has pursued an economic agenda that I call modern supply-side economics. Our policies are designed to expand the productive capacity of the American economy, namely to raise the ceiling for what our economy can produce. To do so, President Biden has signed 3 historic bills into law. We've enacted the bipartisan infrastructure law, our generation's most ambitious effort to modernize roads, bridges, and ports, and broaden access to high-speed internet. We've mounted an historic expansion of American semiconductor manufacturing through the CHIPS and Science Act, and we're making our nation's largest investment in clean energy with the Inflation Reduction Act. These actions have fortified U.S. strength in the industries of the future, and they're lifting our long-term economic outlook. It's important to understand the nature of the healthy economic competition that the United States is pursuing. The United States does not seek competition that is winner take all. Instead, we believe that healthy economic competition with a fair set of rules can benefit both countries over time. A basic principle of economics is that sustained, repeated competition can lead to mutual improvement. Sports teams perform at a higher level when they consistently face top rivals. Firms produce better and cheaper goods when they compete for consumers. There is a world in which, as companies in the US and China challenge each other, our economies can grow, standards of living can rise, and new innovations can bear fruit. For example, China has benefited from American inventions like the personal computer and the MRI. In the same way, I believe that new scientific and medical developments from China can benefit Americans and the world and spur us to undertake even more leading-edge research and innovation. But this type of healthy competition is only sustainable if it's fair to both sides. China has long used government support to help its firms gain market share at the expense of foreign competitors. But in recent years, its industrial policy has become more ambitious and complex. China has expanded support for its state-owned enterprises and domestic private firms to dominate foreign competitors. It's done so in traditional industrial sectors as well as emerging technologies. This strategy has been coupled with aggressive efforts to acquire new technological know-how and intellectual property, including through IP theft and other illicit means. Government intervention can be justified in certain circumstances, such as to correct specific market failures. But China's government employs non-market tools at a much larger scale and breadth than other major economies. China also imposes numerous barriers to market access for American firms that do not exist for Chinese businesses in the United States. For example, Beijing has often required foreign firms to transfer proprietary technology to domestic ones simply to do business in China. These limits on access to the Chinese market tilt the playing field in favor of Chinese firms. Further, we're concerned about a recent uptick in coercive actions targeting U.S. firms, which comes at the same moment that China states that it is reopening for foreign investment. The actions of China's government have had dramatic implications for the location of global manufacturing activity, and they have harmed workers and firms in the US and around the world. In certain cases, China has also exploited its economic power to retaliate against and coerce vulnerable trading partners. For example, it's used boycotts of specific goods as punishment in response to diplomatic actions by other countries. China's pretext for these actions is often commercial, but its real goal is to impose consequences on choices that it dislikes and to force sovereign governments to capitulate to its political demands. The irony is that open, fair, and rules-based global economy the United States is calling for is the very same international order that helped make China's economic transformation possible. And the inefficiencies and vulnerabilities generated by China's unfair practices may end up hurting its own growth. China's senior officials have repeatedly spoken about the importance of allowing markets to play a decisive role in resource allocation, including in a speech just earlier this year. It would be better for China and the world if Beijing were to actually shift policies in these directions and meet its own stated reform ambitions. As we press China on its unfair economic practices, we will continue to take coordinated actions with our allies and partners in response. A top priority for President Biden is the resilience of our critical supply chains. In certain sectors, China's unfair economic practices have resulted in the overconcentration of the production of critical goods inside China. Under President Biden's leadership, we're not only investing in manufacturing at home, we're also pursuing a strategy called friendshoring that is aimed at mitigating vulnerabilities that can lead to supply disruptions. We're creating redundancies in our critical supply chains with a large number of trading partners that we can count on. Of course, we know that the best way for us to strengthen the global economic order is to show the world that it works. Our investments in the international financial institutions and efforts to deepen our ties around the world are enabling more people to benefit from the international economic system. We're also accelerating our commitments in the developing world. For example, the United States and the rest of the G7 aim to mobilize $600 billion in high-quality infrastructure investments by 2027. Our focus is on projects that generate positive economic returns and foster sustainable debt for these countries. And when the international system needs updating, we will not hesitate to do so. The United States is working with shareholders to evolve the multilateral development banks to better combat today's pressing global challenges like climate change, pandemics, and fragility and conflict. As we set the terms of our economic engagement with China, we will also pursue our third objective: cooperation on major global challenges. It's important that we make progress on global issues regardless of our other disagreements. That is what the world needs from its two largest economies. As a foundation, we must continue to develop steady lines of communication between our countries for macroeconomic and financial cooperation. Economic developments in the United States and China can quickly ripple through the global financial markets and broader economy. We must maintain a robust exchange of views about how we're responding to economic shocks. My conversations with Vice Premier Liu He and China's other senior officials have been a good start, and I hope to build on them with my new counterpart. Beyond the macroeconomy, there are two specific global priorities I'd like to highlight today: debt overhang and climate change. These issues can best be managed if both countries work together and in concert with our allies and partners. First, we must work together to help emerging markets and developing countries facing debt distress. The issue of global debt is not a bilateral issue between China and the United States. It is about responsible global leadership. China's status as the world's largest official bilateral creditor imposes on it the same inescapable set of responsibilities as those on other official bilateral creditors when debt cannot be fully repaid. China's participation is essential to meaningful debt relief, but for too long it has not moved in a comprehensive and timely manner. It is served as a roadblock for necessary action. Earlier this year, I felt the urgency of debt relief firsthand when I visited Zambia. Government and business leaders spoke to me about how Zambia's debt overhang has held back critical public and private investment and depressed economic development. But Zambia is not the only country in this situation. The IMF estimates that more than half of low-income countries are close to or already in debt distress. The United States has had extensive discussions with Beijing about the need for speedy debt treatment. We welcome China's recent provision of specific and credible financing assurances for Sri Lanka, which has enabled the IMF to move forward with the program. But now, all of Sri Lanka's bilateral creditors, including China, will need to deliver debt treatments in line with their assurances in a timely manner. We continue to urge China's full participation to provide debt treatments in other countries in line with IMF parameters. This includes urgent cases like Zambia and Ghana. Prompt action on debt is in China's interest. Delaying needed debt treatments raises the cost both for borrowers and creditors. It worsens borrowers' economic fundamentals and increases the amount of debt relief they will eventually need. More broadly, there's considerable room for improvement in the international debt restructuring process. With the IMF and World Bank, we're working with a range of stakeholders to improve the common framework process for low-income countries and the debt treatment process more generally. As I heard from Zambian officials, solving these issues is a true test of multilateralism. Second, we must work together to tackle long-standing global challenges that threaten us all, and climate change is at the top of that list. History shows us what our two countries can do. Moments of climate cooperation between the United States and China have made global breakthroughs possible, including the Paris Agreement. We have a joint responsibility to lead the way. China is the largest emitter of greenhouse gases, followed by the United States. The U.S. will do its part. Over the past year, the United States has taken the boldest domestic climate action in our nation's history. Our investments put us on track to meet U.S. commitments under the Paris Agreement and achieve net zero by 2050. And they will have positive spillovers for the world, including through reductions in the cost of clean energy technologies. We're also working abroad to help countries make a just energy transition to reduce their carbon emissions. These transitions will also help expand energy access and provide economic opportunity for impacted communities and workers. We expect China to deliver on its commitments in our joint Glasgow Declaration. This includes meeting mitigation targets and ending overseas financing of unabated coal-fired power plants. China should also support developing countries and emerging markets in their clean energy transitions. Further, we look forward to working together to boost private capital flows as co-chairs of the G20 Working Group on Sustainable Finance. We stand ready to work with China on the existential challenge of climate change, and we urge China to seriously engage with us and deliver on its commitments. The stakes are too high not to. Well, some see the relationship between the US and China through the frame of great power conflict, a zero-sum bilateral contest where one must fall for the other to rise. President Biden and I don't see it that way. We believe that the world is big enough for both of us. China and the United States can and need to find a way to live together and share in global prosperity. We can acknowledge our differences, defend our own interests, and compete fairly. Indeed, the United States will continue to proceed with confidence about the fundamental strength of the American economy and the skill of American workers. But as President Biden said, we share a responsibility to prevent competition from becoming anything ever near conflict. Negotiating the contours of engagement between great powers is difficult, and the United States will never compromise on our security or principles, but we can find a way forward if China is also willing to play its part. That's why I plan to travel to China at the appropriate time. My hope is to engage in an important and substantive dialogue on economic issues with my new Chinese government counterpart following the political transition in Beijing. I believe this dialogue can help lay the groundwork for responsibly managing our bilateral relationship and cooperating on areas of shared challenge to our nations and the world. As you know, I'm an economist by trade. Economics is popularly seen as a field concerning the structure and performance of entire economies. But at its most granular level, economics is much more foundational. It's the study of choices that people make, specifically how people make choices under specific circumstances of scarcity, of risk, and sometimes of stress, and how choices by individuals and firms affect one another and how they add up to a national or global picture. In other words, an economy is just an aggregate of choices that people make. The relationship between the United States and China is the same. Our path is not preordained, and it is not destined to be costly. The trajectory of this relationship is the aggregate of choices that all of us in these two great powers make over time, including when to cooperate, when to compete, and when to recognize that even amid our competition, we have a shared interest in peace and prosperity. The United States believes that responsible economic relations between the US and China is in the self-interest of our peoples. It is the hope and expectation of the world. And at this moment of challenge, I believe it must be the choice that both countries, the United States and China, make. Thank you.
Thank you for coming. That concludes our program.